Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So nice to be here, and congratulations to Fergus, Tommy and Poppy for founding Better Story. That's a brave thing to do right at this moment. Let's give them a round of applause. There are goodies. I'm rocking my Better Story badge, which is available at the back, and there are 3 Bible studies for you to take away if you want to take some of these themes further. And I know Tommy, Poppy and Fergus will be so excited that you're here because this is our beginning event. And I wanted to think about where we might begin this conversation around nationalism, Christianity, and what I might describe as toxic nationalism. And I thought, let's go to the founding of a nation, and let's look at Genesis chapter 12. So if you've got a Bible or a phone with a Bible on, let's fire that up and see how we go. And I think one of the things I'm seeing is how the Bible is being deployed as a tool or a weapon. And there are nice metaphors in the Bible about the Bible as a weapon, the sword of the Spirit. But I think sometimes people will redeploy the Bible for their own purposes rather than hearing what it actually has to say. And I think one of our most powerful ways of staying grounded in all the maelstrom of information and disinformation is to have a deeper and fuller grasp of the Bible. And so I want us to start at Genesis 12 and have a go. This is the call of Abraham. And man, I've realised I'm really old because I'm actually using the large print Bible that they just happen to have here. But it's working really well because it's quite dark in here, so I'm hoping I won't lose my way. Genesis chapter 12. The Lord had said to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This is the call of Abraham. This is the beginning of the story of Israel. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because there is a promise to make Israel great. Not make Israel great again, but just make them great to begin with. God's ambition was to call a people to himself. That was always the plan. But you might say, okay, well, here's the beginning of nationalism, isn't it? That out of all the nations, God is picking one nation to start with. And this is why we get nationalism, isn't it? That one nation will say, well, God's on my side, he's not on your side. I've got my God, you've got your God, but my God's better than your God. And there's been a history of, I guess, implicit Christian nationalism for a long time. I remember reading a book called Christianity Rediscovered by Vincent Donovan. And he was an American missionary who was going to reach out to the Maasai tribe in Kenya. And he looked at the way, he was a Catholic missionary, he looked at the way the Catholic missions had been trying to do their work. And they'd spent a lot of time on schools and hospitals, but he felt frustrated that no one had actually sat down and kind of explained the Christian story. So he thought, how can I do that? I'm going to try and have contact with this tribe that no one has had contact with before. And he managed to get a sunrise meeting with this tribe. And they all sat on the floor in a big circle. And he was kind of wondering where he should begin. Like, if imagine this really is the first contact with a particular tribe and the message of Jesus. Where should they begin? And so he thought, okay, I'll start at the beginning. And so he said, in the beginning, God. And that's where he kind of ran out, because they said, oh, you don't need to teach us about God. We know all about God. You know, we've got our God, and that tribe over there have got their God. And Vincent said, oh, no. I want to tell you about the true God, the high God, the God who's above every other God, the God that doesn't pick a side in a war, but is above everybody and calls everybody to repentance. And then this tribe goes, oh my goodness, right, we don't know about that God. Could you tell us about him? And Vincent Donovan's about to go, well, of course I can tell you about him. And then he thinks about his own nation's history with God. That often when there was a war, people assumed that God was on their side. And that, God had become a kind of national mascot for his nation. And he said, you know what? Maybe I need to find him too. And so maybe together we can find him in this book. And suddenly the posture changed. That here was someone saying, well, okay, I need to relearn my understanding of God because I've recognized that my own philosophy, theology, politics has conscripted God to suit my own purposes. Does that make sense? And so here we have God saying to Israel that he was going to be their God and he was going to make the nation great. And at one level, this is a positive step, isn't it? That the people of Israel can look at themselves and say, we are a chosen people. God made us. He plucked us out of obscurity. I mean, the origin story of Israel is so fantastic because God deliberately chooses two elderly people to start a tribe. In fact, I think it's in Romans, it says, Abraham and Sarah were as good as dead. And you go, that's brilliant, isn't it? I feel like that most days. But God actually named it over Abraham and Sarah. They're as good as dead. There was no way they are having any babies. And God deliberately chose an infertile couple to be the mother and father of a nation. Why? Because their origin story had to link back to God. Does that make sense? They were a miraculous nation. But there is a sense in which when we think about our relationship with any nation, there ought to be some level of love and commitment to it. That it's not wrong to love the people that we're placed with or the place where we are. In fact, if we don't have enough attachment to the place where we are, things begin to disintegrate quite quickly, don't they? We become very individualistic, very self-serving. Public services don't get commitment from us. Our roads become untidy. We kind of don't look out for one another. We become so individualized that can be unhealthy too. And so even here in this beginning story of the nation of Israel, God is giving Israel a sense of worth, pride, if you like, a sense that they belong to someone, that they owe their origin story to God. But it's an interesting kind of nationalism, isn't it? Because did you see why God chose Israel? What was his purpose? God says, I will bless you, and through you, all nations on the earth will be blessed. So that's not a superiority complex, is it? It's not saying, well, God only loves me. The nation of Israel was supposed to understand, well, God has chosen us, but our purpose is service to other nations. Does that make sense? So it's almost like an inclusive nationalism, a way that says, yes, we have a purpose, we have a place, we have a people, but the purpose of us is to be a conduit of the grace of God to other people. And you might go, well, why did God do it that way? Why choose one nation out of all the nations and use them as a blessing for other people? Why not just zap people directly? Wouldn't that be better? Well, I'm going to tell you a story. My sister, I only have one sister. I have lots of children, but one sister. She's amazing. She's just a little bit younger than me. She does not need a large print Bible like I do. And she's single. And for a long time in her life, she wanted to be married. And in an Asian family, it wouldn't be unusual for me as the older brother to take some responsibility in finding a potential spouse for my sister. I don't know if you've had to play that role for anybody, but it's a lofty task. And it's led to some really awkward conversations. So after an evening like this, I might be checking out all the guys in the room. I'm looking for wedding rings. I'm looking for, are they carrying a Bible? Do they have some kind of spiritual life? What kind of job are they doing? And I'm checking guys out. And I met the most ideal guy on the planet, right? He was a Bible-believing, Jesus-loving Christian. Like, he kind of just seemed to live only to love God and to serve him. Just, he had this sense of gentleness and calmness and kindness. Brilliant. So I'm drawn to him immediately. No wedding ring. Yes. And he worked for a Christian charity that was mainly focused on helping vulnerable people and the homeless. So he's ticking every box that I've got. And then he tells me that he loves my books. okay? So now he's in like the top 0.1% of all possible guys on the planet. And you know what? I could post him a book, couldn't I? I could take one of my books and I could find out his address and I could post him a book. Or I could give a book to my sister and then ask her to get the book to him. Not only would that save on postage, which is good Asian economics if you know about this sort of stuff, but I might make two things happen at once. A book gets to him and a romance gets kindled. Does that make sense? Why did God choose one nation to bless all the other nations? You know the two greatest commandments? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul and mind. God wants a relationship with each one of us. He does. You and I, we were put on this planet to know him. In fact, who we are is contingent on who God is, because we are made in the image of God, right? Our lives do not make sense without God in it. Some people are talking about a quiet revival at the moment. The statistics are contentious. I think there is an openness right now to spiritual things, to people from all sorts of walks of life. It does seem to be affecting young people in particular. And that hunger is because we were born to know God. That's part of who we are. Now, I think some people are on a kind of spiritual pub crawl. Do you remember Russell Brand? Russell Brand, he lives not a million miles from where I live, and he had a dog, and a dog ate a local wild wallaby. And you're going, wait, Krish, what country do you live in? Yeah, I live in Oxfordshire. We have wild wallabies. You might not know this, but we have one less wild wallaby because of Russell Brand. Now, Russell Brand, I think, has been on a spiritual pub crawl for a while, hasn't he? He's tried all sorts of things. He's tried sex and drugs, and he's tried crystals, he's tried meditation, and for a while he's been trying Christianity out. But we don't know if it's the last stop on the pub crawl. Does that make sense? How long will he stick with this? And I think our culture, and a lot of people, I guess your age more than my age, are on that spiritual search right now. And the question is, what will they find? What kind of Christianity will they find when they come looking? And will this be the last stop on their search? Will they say, oh, I tried that, I'm going to go somewhere else? We have an opportunity. And some of that is because we were made in the image of God, and we were made to love and know God. You with me? But there was another commandment. Do you remember it? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul and mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. Those two commands are connected. You can't love God and hate your neighbour. It's a package deal. And so God gives the message of grace and kindness and forgiveness to his people and makes them the means by which other people are going to hear the gospel, because he wants two things. He wants us to know him, and he wants us to know each other. Does that follow? So that's what's going on here in the formation of the nation of Israel. It was never supposed to be a status that they were supposed to hold to themselves. We're the chosen people of God. You're the heathen. God hates you. God loves us. Us versus you. It was always supposed to be, oh my goodness, we've been gifted something so precious. We can't keep it to ourselves. We've got to pass it on to others. For a long time, people have thought of us a bit like postmen or women, that we've been given a message and we're not supposed to keep it to ourselves. We're supposed to pass it on. And if we don't pass it on, something has gone wrong. And that message was supposed to be spoken and lived out both together. That was the calling of the nation of Israel. And that same calling transfers now that we think of ourselves as the church. We are the ingrafted branches into the body, right? We are only allowed to be part of God's kingdom because of the incredible love relationship God had with Israel. He now has and extends it to others. That was what was so remarkable. Did you see at the end of, have a look at Matthew chapter 28 in the New Testament. This is Jesus standing on a mountain, and he's speaking to his young disciples. Most of them, I think, scholars think would be younger than you. And what does he say? Verse 16, Matthew 28. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, stay here, build a Christian nation, and protect it from other nations. Oh no, sorry, that's a different version. I think it's got an American president on the front of it. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. I mean, there's so many beautiful things to say about this. I've got a sermon in itself on this. But you've got these young, frightened disciples. Many of them have barely strayed out of their own country, being told to go to the ends of the earth. And they weren't supposed to think, hold on, if we go to the ends of the earth, they'll be like us. We'll be like the only Christians, and we're terrified that our Christian faith will be smothered or destroyed by these pagan cultures. No, they thought, you know what? God is with us. Jesus has just said, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to us. Therefore, we can go with bold humility into these countries and offer the same grace that we've received from God to other people. And they did. And because of their bravery, there is like an unbroken chain of people that have been sharing the gospel since this moment to you, right? I don't know how far you can trace back your spiritual heritage, how many generations you can go back, whether it's been passed down through your family, or whether like me, you're a convert to Christianity because my friend at school, secondary school, thought, you know what, Krish needs to know about Jesus, I'm going to share the gospel with him. And you know, he traces him back. It was Billy Graham that helped him come to faith when he was at an event, and then Billy Graham's got his own, you know, we've got our incredible stories. In fact, when I was a kid, the best television show on earth was called Record Breakers. Now, some of you are too young to know what that is, but there used to be a book called the Guinness Book of World Records. Have you heard of this? And the most exciting record to break in the Guinness Book of World Records, at least for television in the 1970s and 80s, was the world domino toppling competition. Some person that obviously had a really important social life would go into a warehouse and just line up like, I don't know, 100,000 dominoes, right? And then they'd bring in some kind of C-list celebrity from the Eurovision Song Contest or something, and they would be the person to click the first domino, and then these dominoes would all fall and the cameras would be going around, and then there'd be this kind of golden domino, and if that golden domino went over, that was the world record. And we'd all be willing it, the whole nation, all the kids would just be watching this TV show, willing the domino momentum to get to this golden one, and then everything would be wonderful. And normally, the thing would run out of momentum about 3 dominoes short. And then there was this guy, his name was Roy Castle, and he'd go, oh man, that's really tough. But kids, dedication, that's what it takes. Let's try again next week. And then, oh my goodness, we'll try again. And can you imagine this, right? From this moment, like Abraham, he did his job. He faithfully followed God into, you know, a territory he'd never been in, had to go through all sorts of scrapes. You get the whole of the Old Testament, and then you get Jesus, and then you get the disciples, and then they're saying, right, into all the earth, we'll do it. We'll take whatever cost it takes in order to get the gospel out. Most of the disciples get killed for their faith, but still the gospel gets passed on and passed on and passed on. And then it comes here, to this moment, to us. And, you know, that's the challenge, isn't it? Will we kind of wobble, or will we actually be part of this mission to take the grace of God everywhere? It isn't supposed to be treasured by us and hidden from everyone else. It's supposed to be passed on. But something weird has been happening. So somehow this understanding that the gospel was always for the whole world, that to be chosen by God was to be saved for service into the world, somehow that's being kind of challenged at this moment. And there's back history, you know, there have been times when Christians have misunderstood what the mission was. You know, you go back to the Crusades and people thought, you know, our mission was to subjugate other nations through physical force and violence. And we begin to see a Muslim person as an enemy that needs to be killed rather than as someone that needs to receive the grace of God. And, you know, there have been times and times again throughout history where we've kind of misunderstood the call and begun to think actually it's about protection. It's about guarding our borders and our boundaries from those that are other. And we're in that moment again now. So Poppy mentioned that I go on GB News. And if you've heard me speak recently, I'll talk about this because I think there is something happening to our nation. It's affecting the population in general, but it's interesting because they're using a lot of Christian language to justify what's going on. And we need to kind of tease out why that's happening, what's happening, and then maybe think about what we can do about it. Does that sound all right? That's where we'll go next. So in the GB News world, and there's two studios, one's near Paddington Station, and the other one is underneath the Queen Elizabeth Conference Centre in Parliament Square. And I mean, there are people that work like 12-hour shifts. They're young people just like you, and they never see daylight, right? Because they'll go in at like 7 a.m. and then they'll work underground, and then they'll come up again and it's dark again, and they're, just must be a really tough environment. And if you've ever watched, have you watched more than 10 minutes of GB News? Has anyone done that? Okay, yeah, counselling and care is available in another room afterwards, but I mean, I'm teasing a little bit, but I had to watch 20 minutes of GB News last week. I was called on to talk about immigration. That's the topic they like to talk to me about a lot. And it was, the announcement was delayed, so I didn't get to go on for a while. So I had to sit in a Zoom meeting waiting for my slot. And I'm on edge, right? Because it's quite a febrile environment. There's a lot of shouting that goes on, hopefully not by me, but so I'm tense, ready, and I'm just paying attention to everything so that I'm ready. And it was the deal that Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, had arranged with the Turkish government. Do you remember this? We were going to sell like 20 jets, second-hand jets, to the Turkish government. And so Keir was giving his announcement. And he said it was great to be in Turkey. And the two studio, the presenter and the guest, said, what's he doing calling it Turkey? It's Turkey. He's got some woke name for Turkey now. What is he doing? Maybe he just is saying Turkey because it sounds like Sirkia. He's just trying to get his own name into the name of the country. Oh man, this guy is despicable. I mean, why is he in Turkey? This guy, Jet Set Kia, he spends all of his time in other countries. Why isn't he running this country? And why are we selling jets to the Turks? Surely we need the jets for ourselves. The Russians might be coming for us, so we need to have all the jets we can. And he says that there's going to be new jobs. There isn't going to be any new jobs. These jobs will never happen. This is just a disaster. This is Keir Starmer, complete disaster. We are not impressed. And I'm going, flipping heck. It was like a line-by-line dissection of everything he got. And whatever you think about our Prime Minister, I'm just trying to help you picture this media environment. I grew up with a show called The Muppet Show. And there were these two guys in The Muppet Show. They're Stadler and Waldorf, I think their names was. And they were in a balcony. And basically everything that happened in The Muppet Show was terrible, right? Kermit was too green. Miss Piggy was too pink. Like the music was terrible. It was going on too long. They just sat there and criticised the whole thing. And this febrile, GB News is one of many news outlets. But this media environment where you're just critical the whole time. And when I go on, normally there were kind of two narratives, two stories being told. And I've just worked out the other day they're actually linked. I thought they were separate. But basically the two kind of news narratives, one is these terrible woke, I think you said you might have the woke mind virus, these terrible woke lefty people that are destroying our country. That's one. So they'll find some story in the news and tell you how ridiculous it is to be left wing. And the other narrative is these migrants that are coming here to destroy our country. Those are the two arguments, right? Whatever news story you put in, those are the two things that they get angry about. And it is quite angry a lot of the time. Now, I was trying to figure out, well, how are those two things connected? Is it kind of like just a two-pronged attack? And then I read a really disturbing book. It was called Bibles of the Far Right. Doesn't sound like an exciting book, but it's a scary book. And it dissected a manifesto that a guy called Andreas Breivik wrote. Andreas Breivik was a very disturbed man growing up in Norway, and he launched a terrible attack, first a bomb attack in the centre of Oslo, and then while all the police and the kind of armed forces were responding to the bomb attack, he then disguised himself as a police officer, got on a ferry and went to a small island called Utoya. And in the Utoya island was a kind of youth camp run by the kind of more left-wing party. And he went around and he systematically tried to kill as many children as possible. I think 69 children and young adults were killed by him, bang, 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 one after another. And this book, Bibles of the Far Right, looks at this 1,500-page dossier, manifesto that Andreas Breivik put out. And he often dressed himself as a crusader. He'd make videos about himself as a crusader. You know, we need to fight back against Islam taking over our world, taking over our nation. And the way we fight back is by fighting against these left-wing multiculturalists who are making it easier for the Muslims to come over and destroy our country. I hadn't twigged that that was the logic, that you attack the left because they're making it easier for the Muslims to come in. So ultimately, in his mindset, it was a Muslim invasion that he was most worried about. Does that make sense? There's a lot of Bible quoted in his manifesto, and a lot of that Bible is about violence. He kind of riffs into some of the kind of purity stuff that's in there about one nation to be kept pure from all the others. The subjugation texts where the nation of Israel sent in to punish other nations, like you have in the book of Joshua. So some of that's there, the kind of violence one, and then this kind of purity metaphor. Friendship with the world is enmity with God, and therefore we need to be very separate. So those two are the kind of big themes that come through. Now, again, I'm not saying there's a direct causal connection. I'm not saying that the people on GB News are reading Andreas Breivik's manifesto, but there are some themes that keep coming up again and again. So when I go on, I'll debate someone called Matt Goodwin. I don't know if you've come across him. He's a commentator who's often on Question Time. He says he's a former academic. And he says, oh, Krish, we've really got to protect our Judeo-Christian heritage from all these people from the Middle East that are destroying our culture. And I try to stay calm. I'm not good at it all the time. And I'm saying, Matt, it's really interesting that you mentioned the Judeo-Christian heritage to our nation. Have you any idea where that Judeo-Christian heritage might have come from? Jesus was a Middle Eastern man, right? Christianity is not indigenous to these isles. It's come from somewhere else. It's an import into our nation. So, what do you mean? And it's interesting you're saying Judeo-Christian. That seems to be deliberately framed to exclude Muslims. And increasingly, the challenge is migration in general, but more specifically focused on Muslims, because they talk about a civilizational moment, that Western civilization is under threat by people coming from another civilization. This is quoting someone like Samuel Huntington, who again, I don't think was necessarily part of that group, but they're using his language to say actually Islam is incompatible with Western Judeo-Christian values. Do you see how that's kind of working? So they're taking culture war to another level, and they're putting a Christian gloss on it. And I'll say, oh, Matt, it's interesting you mentioned Judeo-Christian values. That the Christian values have got a lot to say about how you treat the outsider and the stranger and the foreigner and the sojourner among you. And he goes, Krish, let me tell you about the Bible. He doesn't know I've got a PhD in theology. He just thinks I'm some crazy woke lefty tofu eating nutcase. But I haven't told him yet about my theological background. He says, look, the Bible is really clear. You're supposed to love God. You're supposed to love your family. You're supposed to love your nation, love your brother, love your cousin, and it's not as universal as you think. Do you see what's happening? We're redeploying some Christian language to boundary who is acceptable of love and support and to deliberately exclude other people. Does that make sense? So I've heard people in the House of Commons begin to say things like, you know, England is the oldest Christian nation in the world. I'm going, pretty sure Ethiopia kind of outstrips us. You know, the Ethiopian eunuch, there he is in the book of Acts, and they would trace their ancestry in the Christian faith like 1,000 years before Christianity came anywhere near here. But okay, let's play that out. And they'll say things like, there are two great religious threats to our Christian heritage. And they'll say, well, that would be Islam and wokeism. Do you see how those two things just keep popping up again and again? And I can understand a little bit about why some of those ideas seem to gain traction. So I'm noticing a kind of interesting new resetting of the kind of political map. This is just my reading. I'm no expert. I'm a theologian, not a politician. So I'm really keen to hear what you have to say afterwards. But, and I know this is a bit binary, but let me tell you how I see it, and then you can correct me. So if you take the left side of the equation, and the left actually has a strong Christian heritage. You know, Keir Hardie was a Christian socialist, and they saw a lot of the kind of social justice, communitarian thinking coming from the Bible. But at the moment, the left is going through an interesting kind of reinvention. You know, if you go to the extremes. So, for example, the assisted dying conversation. Some of the politicians on the left were saying, don't bring your Christian values into this conversation. Or accusing Christian MPs who didn't talk about their Christian values but gave other reasons for resisting assisted dying as hiding their Christian values. So that you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you didn't, right? It was a real problem. And so Christians for a while have been particularly concerned about issues of, some Christians, let me say, have been particularly concerned about issues relating to life, death and sex. Those seem to be the kind of hot button issues that Christians get particularly excited about. I've got a wider range of things I'm interested in as well. I work with refugees, I care about vulnerable children, I care about the environment. But for some reason, those issues of sex, death and life have become more salient to certain parts of the church. And so when the left, the extreme left, kind of go for things like assisted dying or the decriminalisation of abortion for the mother up until term, that really triggers certain Christians. Does that make sense? These are the most vulnerable people, the elderly and the unborn. And again, I'm sympathetic with some of those things. I'm actually sympathetic with the decriminalisation piece for the mother, because there's all sorts of circumstances that could lead a mother, right? But anyway, Christians are getting triggered by this, and they're being told that their faith is not welcome in this space. And so it kind of pushes some Christians away from the left. And with all those concerns about the environment and about the poor and the vulnerable, they're left behind as well, because the things that really matter to some Christians are issues of sex, death and life. You with me? And on the right, you've got people saying, we're a Christian nation. We want your Christian faith. Bring your Christian faith. In fact, we'll make Christianity great again in this country. And, you know, that we're your people when it comes to, you know, sexuality, life issues and death issues. So come here. In fact, one of the chief and most outspoken champions on the assisted dying bill is a guy called Danny Kruger, and he's done some valiant work on the whole area of assisted dying, but he's just joined the Reform Party. And the Reform Party is now saying to, I've spoken to a pastor today, they're courting the church because this is a Christian nation and these are the issues that you really care about. But you listen to the Reform Party talk about immigration, and suddenly some of those other teachings that the Bible has to say about welcoming the stranger and the vulnerable don't seem to be as salient. Does that make sense? And so here we are. And then beyond reform, and you can decide how far beyond reform, you've got people like Tommy Robinson. And Tommy Robinson does this huge march to unite the kingdom. And Tommy Robinson is saying that he's become a Christian now. And it's because he's a Christian, He wants to stand up for Christian values. And he'll champion some of the things that particularly those Christians that are moving this way are interested in. But he also brings with him some pretty dark things to say about Islam and to say about other immigrants. So it feels like the landscape is changing. I think I saw that particularly when Charlie Kirk was killed. And here it is, like, I don't think anyone should be shot for having a debate on campus, whether you think the debates were fair or not, or whether it was a fair fight between someone who'd been doing this for a while and freshmen on the university campus. No one should get shot for expressing an opinion. That's not right. So I found there were some pretty dark things said by people that disagreed with Charlie Kirk on his death. Like, even if you disagree completely with his politics, to celebrate his death seems just wicked and unkind, particularly as he died in front of his children and his wife, right? But I noticed that somehow he was almost became a martyr. And do you remember there was a memorial service held for him in a stadium? And it was interesting because some of the people that I listened to on my Spotify playlist were the worship leaders that were kind of hosting that event. And I think I was really torn about it because there's a bit in Philippians where it says Paul is in prison and he's been put in prison, and while he's in prison, some members of the church, the early church, right, fresh out of the box, brand new church, are kind of making a ministry, a name for themselves while he's in prison, okay? They're stirring things up, they're saying, oh, Paul can't really be blessed by God, here am I, I'm great, and they're kind of getting out there, preaching the gospel, building their own ministries. And they're, I would be so angry if that was happening. But Paul goes, what does it matter as long as the gospel is preached? And I go, oh, man, that guy is so generous. He doesn't care about his own reputation. All he cares about is the gospel getting to the nations. That's Abraham type Christianity and Matthew 28 type Christianity. Go for it. And so part of me goes, wow, there was a huge audience to that. The worship band was singing great music, and there were some moments of beauty in the middle of this memorial service. And, for example, even some pretty cynical, hard-hearted people were quite moved when his wife, Charlie Kirk's wife, talked about forgiveness to the people that had murdered her husband. I mean, wow, I don't think many of us could be in that. But it would have been great if you're going to do that, say, okay, we've now finished the Christian part, okay? That, we all believe that Jesus lived and died and rose again, and there's forgiveness and there's opportunity for new life. That's right. Now, the next part, there are Christians on both sides of this debate. Some people will think that, we should be more welcoming to refugees, while other people like Charlie would think we need to be, more clear on our borders. But, Charlie was committed to this particular form of Christianity. You choose for yourself. But it was a kind of seamless garment, wasn't it? From your favourite worship leader to kind of bits of the gospel to suddenly a whole political package. Does that make sense? And that's when I thought things had somehow changed. And were the worship warm-up act, are they part of the whole thing? Does that make sense? And am I thinking about some of the songs that we sing differently as a result now? Because there's a lot of triumphalism. Our God is greater. It's like, yes, he is, but what are you saying? Is he greater than kind of those horrible Muslims that are coming to invade our country? Is that what you mean when you say that? Or sing a little louder. Why? Why are we singing a little louder? Is it so that we drown out what other people are saying because we don't really want to hit? So it's made me quite kind of skeptical to say, is there a whole package that is so subsumed by the culture war that it isn't just about becoming a Christian anymore, it's about a whole political operation. So that's the kind of journey I'm on, is try and figure this out. And I think in the middle of that, we need to find a way to be able to say, look, there are brilliant things on the left, and there are brilliant things on the right, and you don't have to jump in and buy the whole package either way. That there's a way you can be discerning. In Albania, they say, eat the fish and leave the bones. that the gospel doesn't belong to one political party, but the gospel calls every single culture to both celebration and repentance. That God finds good in everybody and wickedness in everybody. And therefore, everyone's called to repentance and faith. I'm going to close in a second, then we'll do the kind of Q&A and stuff. But I want to leave you, I use this a lot, so sorry if you've heard it from me before. I've been watching again and reading a lot of the kind of civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s in America. And you've got a similar kind of, I don't know, scapegoating, oppression of minorities happening in America, and particularly in the south of America. And sadly, the church was kind of backing the wrong side a lot of the time. You might remember Martin Luther King was in a Birmingham jail, and he wrote a letter, and he didn't write it to the Ku Klux Klan, he wrote it to the church. And he says, sometimes it's not the shouts of our enemies, but the silence of our friends that's the hardest to hear. And so sometimes the church can get so embedded in a culture war that it can't see that we've kind of picked the wrong side. Anyway, Martin Luther King's in this moment, and it's clear that one group thinks that white people should be supreme and black people should be suppressed. Because it's a zero-sum game, right? There's only so much resource, there's so much stuff. Someone's got to win and someone's got to lose, and in their minds it needs to be white people that win and black people that lose. But he's also got another group of people, and they are kind of more the kind of Malcolm X types, and they think it's time for a revolution, right? It's time for black people to succeed and white people to be suppressed, because there's only so much resource, right? So it's a zero-sum game. And Martin Luther King says, no, no to them and no to them. I refuse. And he pictures, you remember his most famous speech, I Have a Dream speech? He said, I dream that one day, my daughter, your daughter, they can both live in freedom. We can believe in the flourishing of everybody. And I think that's our challenge at the moment. People accuse me of, oh, you love the other nations, but you hate Britain. You love refugees, but you hate white working class boys. You know, you're all interested in overseas stuff, but you're not interested in people here. And I'm going, well, no. The gospel was always supposed to be local and global, wasn't it? We were supposed to love the place we're in. There is a healthy form of commitment to a nation. There's an unhealthy form of commitment to a nation, but there's a healthy form of commitment to a nation. This nation is better because Christians are working in their local community. Because Christians are helping the poor, they're working in prisons. I've met some of you that are doing that. You're fostering and adopting children. You're trying to help the homeless, not homeless people from over there, but homeless people here. We care about where we are. But Christians also care about the world, because the gospel was always for the world. And so we're not, globalists or nationalists. We can be a healthy combo, can't we? There always used to be a little challenge we used to set ourselves. Like, imagine you had £10. That was the total amount of money that you were going to give away as part of your offering to God. £10. How much of it needs to go to your local church? Some people say, well, £10, all of it needs to go. Well, what about your responsibility to World Mission? Should you give some of that money to World? Yeah, okay, I should give some money to World Mission. Okay, how much money should you give to evangelism? How much money should you give to justice? Oh, okay, well, and you could all decide for yourselves what the split should be, but most of us agree there is a split, right? You put some of it in all of those boxes. And I think Christians can live that way. We can be absolutely committed to our country and caring about our neighbours, but we can also be committed to serving the global purposes that God has in the world. We don't have to choose. We can do all of those things. And for those people that keep trying to push us into a box, we say, no. We have a better story, a better dream, a better vision. And that's what I think the church needs to wake up and do right now. All right, I'm going to pause. You're going to have a little chat with your neighbour. I said some pretty controversial things that might not make the edit of the video. I tried, hopefully, to be fair to people, and if I haven't been, then I'm up for hearing that. But have you got an immediate question or concern or something that you want to kind of get off your chest? Just express that to your neighbour, and then we'll try and do a bit of Q&A together. That sound all right? Okay.